On the night of March 12, 1928, just before midnight, the lights of Los Angeles began to flicker. 40 miles north of the city, in a canyon almost no one has heard of, something is starting to give way. The closest thing to an exact time came from Los Angeles' power system, 11:57 and 30 seconds. What is leaving the canyon now is moving at 18 miles per hour. It will travel 54 miles to the Pacific Ocean. Between here and there are sleeping families in 7 towns. In Los Angeles, the man who built this dam is walking to a phone he cannot answer in time. Please, God, don't let people be killed. Please, God, don't let people be killed. By morning, more than 400 people will be dead. Bodies will wash ashore as far south as the Mexican border. Some will still be found in the 1990s. The man on the phone will spend the rest of his life in silence. And the only part of his dam still standing will be deliberately blown apart by the same city that built it, so that no one would ever come looking for it again. Los Angeles had begun as a Spanish and Mexican pueblo, but by the turn of the 20th century, it was an American city growing faster than its water supply could handle. The Los Angeles River was a trickle. The summers were merciless. By 1900, the city had 100,000 people and not enough water for any of them. By 1910, it had 300,000. By 1920, it had nearly 600,000. By 1928, the year this story takes place, it had passed 1 million. A city was growing in the desert faster than almost any city in America. And in the middle of it stood a man who had decided that nothing, not geography, not law, not the people who lived where the water came from, would be allowed to slow it down. His name was William Mulholland. He was born in Belfast in 1855. At 15, after a beating from his father over poor grades, he ran away from home and joined the British Merchant Marine. He spent 4 years on cargo ships crossing the Atlantic. He arrived in Los Angeles in 1877 with no money, no engineering degree, and no formal education past primary school. He took a job digging ditches for the Los Angeles Water Company. He was a zanjero, a ditch tender, the lowest position in the city's water bureau. At night, he read hydrology, geology, civil engineering. He had no teacher. He had textbooks and a kerosene lamp. By 1902, the city named him chief engineer. In 1913, he finished the Los Angeles Aqueduct, 233 miles of concrete and tunnel, carrying water from the Owens River across the Sierra Nevada and the Mojave Desert into the San Fernando Valley. When the gates opened, water began to fall down a hillside in front of 40,000 cheering Angelinos. He stepped up, looked at the crowd, and said 5 words. There it is. Take it. 230 miles north, the people of the Owens Valley watched their river drain into a pipe. Their farms went brown. Their wells went dry. Their schools closed. By 1924, they had had enough. On the morning of May 21, 1924, 40 Owens Valley farmers drove a caravan of cars to a stretch of the aqueduct outside Lone Pine. They unloaded 500 pounds of dynamite. They blew a hole in the wall of the conduit large enough to drive a truck through. It was the opening shot of what California newspapers came to call the Water Wars. Over the next 3 years, the aqueduct would be dynamited 11 times. Armed ranchers seized the Alabama gates and turned Los Angeles water back into the dry riverbed for 4 days. Picnickers came from neighboring towns to watch. William Mulholland was, according to a colleague, apoplectic. Asked about the bombings, he said, in a moment that was reported in the next day's papers, that he half regretted so many of the valley's orchard trees being dead because there were no longer enough of them left to hang all the troublemakers who lived there. By 1926, the city of Los Angeles owned 90% of the land and water of the Owens Valley. The resistance broke in August 1927, when the bank that had been funding the farmers collapsed under embezzlement charges. The water wars were over. Mulholland had won. But Los Angeles was still growing, and water that arrives through a pipe has to be stored somewhere before the city can drink it. So in 1924, even as the Owens Valley resistance was escalating, Mulholland chose a narrow canyon in the Sierra Pelona Mountains, 40 miles northwest of downtown, and began to build the largest reservoir his department had ever attempted. He chose the site himself. He drew the plans himself. He supervised the construction himself. No outside engineer reviewed his design. No licensed geologist signed off on the foundation. The chief engineer of the city of Los Angeles was, in 1924, the only man in California with the authority to overrule William Mulholland. And that man was William Mulholland. By May of 1926, the St. Francis Dam was finished. 185 feet tall, 700 feet across, 12 billion gallons of water held back by one man's certainty. It was, his admirers said, his masterpiece. It would stand for less than 2 years. Preliminary work began in 1924. By August, crews were pouring concrete into San Francisco Canyon. 175,000 cubic yards of concrete. 2 years of labor by men who lived in tents in the canyon. The dam was a concrete gravity arch, a curved wall designed to hold back water by sheer mass. The kind of structure that survives by not moving. The eastern wall of the canyon was a fractured stone called mica schist, the kind of rock that splits along 10,000 parallel planes, the way a deck of cards splits when you drop it. The western wall was a sandstone, the Sespe red beds, that crumbled in the hand and softened like sugar when wet. No proper geological survey was conducted at either abutment. The only investigation was a brief site visit by Mulholland and a Stanford geology professor named John Branner before design began. Branner spent a single afternoon in the canyon. He did not return. He was the only outside expert who would ever set foot on the project. Halfway through construction, Mulholland made a decision. He decided the dam should be taller. The earlier design called for a dam about 175 feet high. He raised it to 185 feet, increasing the reservoir's capacity to roughly 38,000 acre-feet. He did not adequately redesign the structure for the added load. In gravity dam engineering, the ratio of base width to height is the equation that decides whether the structure stands. Mulholland changed the height. He did not change the equation enough. The dam, as it rose, contained no internal drainage gallery, the inspection corridor that would have allowed engineers to look for cracks and leaks from inside the wall. It contained no contraction joints, the gaps that allow concrete to expand and contract with temperature. It contained no cutoff wall under the foundation, the buried barrier that controls seepage from below. It contained no reinforcing steel. By May 1926, it was finished. The reservoir began to fill. A quarter-mile below the dam, in a small wooden cottage, a man named Tony Harnischfeger came to live with his 6-year-old son, Coder. Harnischfeger was the damkeeper. He was 32 years old. He had recently divorced. The boy lived with him. His daughter lived with the mother in Cantil, 200 miles north. He shared the cottage with his girlfriend, a woman named Leona Johnson. Every morning before sunrise, Harnischfeger walked the crest of the dam with a notebook. He inspected the abutments. He noted the leaks. All large dams leak. The question is how they leak. Clear water through a known seam is normal. Muddy water through a new opening is the single thing a damkeeper is trained to fear most. Muddy water means the dam is taking its own foundation with it. Within a year of the reservoir filling, the workers in the canyon had developed a phrase they used in place of goodbye. They said it to each other at the end of every shift. "See you later, if the dam don't break." Tony Harnischfeger heard the joke. He did not laugh. He had, according to a friend named William Hoke, raised concerns about the dam's safety with his superiors in Los Angeles. He had, according to the same friend, been told that if he wanted to keep his job, he should stop calling the dam unsafe. So he stopped saying it. What he did instead was build a stairway. Behind the cottage, climbing the hillside to higher ground. Wooden planks, hand cut. He built it himself in the evenings, after his shifts. He told no one why. Monday, March 12, 1928. The reservoir behind the St. Francis Dam had been filled to capacity for 5 days. It was the highest the water had ever stood. A few minutes after sunrise, Tony Harnischfeger walked the western abutment with his son. He had walked it 1,000 times. This morning, on the lower face of the dam, near the place where the concrete met the canyon wall, he saw something he had not seen before. A new leak. And the water coming out of it was muddy. Tony Harnischfeger had been a damkeeper for 10 years. He knew exactly what he was looking at. At 7:15 on the morning of March 12, 1928, Tony Harnischfeger called Los Angeles. The call reached the office of the chief engineer. William Mulholland was at his desk by 7:30. He listened to his damkeeper describe the leak. He thanked him. He hung up. He told his deputy, Harvey Van Norman, to bring the car around. The drive from downtown Los Angeles to San Francisco Canyon in 1928 took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Mulholland and Van Norman arrived at the dam at 10:30. Mulholland was 72 years old. He had built the dam. He had filled the reservoir. He had spent the last 2 years answering, in private, every doubt about the structure with his own conviction that he had built it right. He walked the western abutment with Tony Harnischfeger and Harvey Van Norman. The three men stood at the muddy leak. Tony explained what he had explained on the telephone. The water is brown. The opening is new. The discharge is changing volume. Mulholland and Van Norman conferred. Mulholland turned and looked at the access road that had been cut into the hillside the previous week. The road was loose dirt. The runoff from the road, he decided, was what was coloring the leak. The leak itself, he said, was within normal limits for a dam of this size. The dam, Mulholland said, was safe. He had spoken. Around 12:30, Mulholland and Van Norman got back in the car. Tony Harnischfeger watched them drive away. Tony Harnischfeger spent the afternoon on the dam. He took readings. He noted volumes. He watched the leak. The discharge, by his own measurement, was inconsistent, sometimes heavier, sometimes lighter. He wrote it down. He did not call Los Angeles a second time. Beneath the dam, water was beginning to do something the engineers above did not know to look for. Modern investigators have argued that the mica schist of the eastern abutment was absorbing water along countless parallel planes. A piece of that abutment, later cataloged by investigators as Block 35, may have begun to creep. An ancient landslide, sleeping since the Pleistocene, may have been starting to wake. Earlier investigators placed more emphasis on the weak western foundation. Either way, the dam had been built on geology it did not truly understand. At 1:45, a carpenter named Ace Hopewell rode his motorcycle past the dam on his way home from Powerhouse Number 1. He looked at the dam as he passed it. He saw nothing wrong. About 1.5 miles upstream, riding into the dark, he heard a sound above the noise of his motor that he later described as rocks tumbling down a hillside. He kept going. 11:57 p.m. A piece of the dam's foundation or abutment gave way. Water that had been seeping through weak rock found the opening and turned it into a nozzle. The pressure behind the dam was 12 billion gallons. The closest thing to an exact second came from 40 miles south in Los Angeles, when a power line snapped and the lights of the city flickered. What was leaving the canyon was a wall of water 140 feet high, moving at 18 miles an hour. A 1/4 mile downstream, in a small wooden cottage, lived a man, a woman, and a 6-year-old boy. Tony Harnischfeger, Leona Johnson, coder. Leona's body would be found 2 days later, fully clothed, crushed between two enormous blocks of concrete near the base of the dam. The stairway he had built was untouched. 1.5 miles downstream stood Powerhouse Number 2, where 67 men and members of their families lived in worker housing. The wave reached it 5 minutes after the dam fell. 64 of them died. A woman named Lillian Curtis climbed onto the roof of her house with her 3-year-old son, Danny. The roof floated. Her husband, Lyman, and her 2 daughters, Marjorie and Maisie, did not. At the Los Angeles-Ventura County line stood a Southern California Edison construction camp. 150 itinerant linemen slept in canvas tents. When the wave hit, it lifted the tents off the ground. The men who had zipped their tent flaps shut for the night were carried, inflated, downstream. The men who had left them open were not. 84 of the 150 did not survive the night. At 1 a.m, the first official alarm reached the night telephone operator in Santa Paula. Her name was Louise Gipe. She was 33 years old. She did not leave her switchboard. She began calling residents one by one. In Satacoy, the night operator, Rysel Jones, did the same. They are remembered in the histories of the night as the Hello Girls. A Santa Paula motorcycle officer named Thornton Edwards rode into the path of the flood. He knocked on every third door. He told the residents to flee and to wake their neighbors, and to not stop until they reached high ground. The residents who survived that night called him afterward the Paul Revere of Santa Paula. The wave reached the Pacific Ocean at 5:30 in the morning, 54 miles from where it began. When it crossed the shoreline at Montalvo, south of Ventura, it was still nearly 2 miles wide and moving at 6 miles an hour. Bodies would wash ashore as far south as the Mexican border. Some would still be moving in the surf when the sun came up. Daylight in the Santa Clara River Valley revealed something the people who lived there did not have a word for. 1,200 homes destroyed. 24,000 acres of farmland buried under silt. Bridges twisted. Railroad track folded over itself. Orchards that had taken 40 years to grow, gone in a single night. And the dead. The dance halls of Santa Paula were converted into morgues. Each body was photographed before burial, in case someone, someday, would come looking. At Ivy Lawn Memorial Park in Ventura, the unclaimed were buried together in a mass grave. The official death toll, when the Los Angeles County coroner closed the count in August, was 385. It was wrong. The Santa Clara River Valley in 1928 was lined with farm worker camps. Mexican families, Japanese families, Filipino families. They lived in shacks along the riverbanks because that is where the work was, and because the land beside a river was the cheapest land to rent. They were hit first, they were hit hardest, and they were counted last. Modern research by the historian Anne Stansel, working from death records, parish ledgers, and bilingual newspapers, places the actual death toll at more than 600. On March 21st, 9 days after the dam fell, the Los Angeles County coroner opened a public inquest. Witnesses came forward across 3 weeks of testimony. Engineers described the foundation failures. A friend of Tony Harnischfeger named William Hoke testified that Tony had raised concerns about the safety of the dam and had been told by his superiors that if he wanted to keep his job, he should stop calling it unsafe. And then, on March 28th, the chief engineer of the city of Los Angeles took the stand. He was 72 years old. He had not slept in 9 days. Reporters described his hand shaking as he raised it to take the oath. When the questioning began, he refused to spread the blame. "Don't blame anyone else," he told the jury. "You just fasten it on me. If there was an error in human judgment, I was the human, and I won't try to fasten it on anyone else." And then, the line that became his epitaph. "On occasions like this, I envy the dead." The jury, after 3 weeks, returned a verdict of an error in engineering judgment by the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply and its chief engineer. They explicitly declined to recommend criminal prosecution. They added a single sentence that became, in the years that followed, the founding principle of American dam safety. No municipal dam should ever be left to the sole judgment of one man, no matter how imminent. Mulholland tried to resign. The Department of Water and Power's board refused, citing 50 years of service. He retired quietly on December 1st, 1928. He never built another dam. Within months, the city of Los Angeles ordered the only piece of the dam still standing, the tombstone, dynamited, so that no one would ever be able to come and look at it. By 1931, a major California water history book published in San Francisco did not mention the disaster at all. William Mulholland died in 1935, in seclusion, at the age of 79. Friends said he never recovered. The road that runs along the spine of the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles, the road tens of thousands of people drive every day, is named after him. The Hoover Dam, already planned for Black Canyon on the Colorado River, nearly stalled in Congress because opponents pointed out it was the same type of concrete arch dam as the one that had just killed hundreds of people. Federal engineers were required to conduct a full independent safety review before the bill was signed into law in December 1928. The International Commission on Large Dams was founded that same year. The first California Dam Safety Act was passed the following year, 1929. The dam safety system you trust when you live downstream of one exists because William Mulholland did not have one. A quarter mile below the place where the dam used to stand, on a hillside in San Francisco Canyon, broken pieces of concrete still lie where the wave left them. The cottage that stood here is gone. The picket fence is gone. The man who walked this canyon every morning before sunrise with a notebook in his hand is gone. His body was never found. His son's body was recovered downstream in the days after. The rest of the dead would be returned to their families slowly, over the years and over the decades. In 1992, the remains of one of them were uncovered deep underground near Newhall, 20 miles south of where the wave began. In the canyon, the wind moves through the dry brush. The pieces of the dam lie where they have lain for nearly 100 years. And the only sound is the sound the canyon made before any of this. Before the city, before the man, before the dam.